Climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest mountain in Africa, may seem like a crazy idea for a retired couple who've been married for almost 40 years. But there we were in Arusha, Tanzania, on the morning of October 7, 2005, ready to join some friends on a 6-day trek to the roof of Africa. At 7:30, the bus from Good Earth Tours arrived. In no time at all, the guides and porters picked up our packs and hiking gear and loaded them on the bus. Somehow they managed to jam all of our stuff and their stuff plus 16 people into a 12-person bus. The trip was Steve's idea. He hosted Kilimanjaro planning potlucks at his house for over 5 years. 7 of his swimming and hiking buddies signed up to go along. I was looking for a cool place to celebrate my 60th birthday on October 11th, so why not Kilimanjaro? Steve, 63, is a world-class swimmer and wanted to try a little hiking for a change. Bill, my husband, 61, is an avid biker, runner, and hiker. Debbie D. joined us from Hawaii. She's quiet but quick to flash a warm smile. Leo, a marathon runner, focused a lot of his attention on his beautiful girlfriend, Debbie L., who really didn't need anyone to take care of her. Bubbly Kim came to celebrate her 50th birthday, and Kim's 43-year-old husband, Al, competes in Ironman events. Our head guide, Godlison, greeted us with some advice.
So, everyone make sure that you drink a lot of water, 3 liters each. And then after you done the mountain, you come back down for 1 month, no drinking water.
The 6-hour bus ride to the trailhead was an adventure in itself. Watching the scenes from the window, bonding with the group, getting to know our new companions, and then getting our first peek at Kilimanjaro. At 3 o'clock, we registered at the trailhead and prepared for our adventure. I'll let Bill report on the daily stats.
We began our trek at Rongai Gate and hiked to Simba Camp. We hiked 4.4 miles in 3.5 hours. We started at an elevation of 6,400 feet and hiked to 8,500 feet, climbing 2,100 feet.
We began hiking through corn and potato fields. Our pace was poli-poli, Swahili for slowly, slowly. Poli-poli prevents fatigue and helps us acclimate to the altitude. Everyone on the mountain chanted poli-poli, and poli-poli we would go.
Poli-poli!
Poli-poli.
The porters passed us loaded with all our stuff. No poli-poli for them. They had to hurry ahead to set up our first campsite before we arrived. Halfway down the trail, we stopped for a break.
It is hard doing the slower pace, but I can see that it's going to be good.
I feel wonderful, and I feel I have to go pee because I've been drinking too much water. Leo summed it up.
We're finally on our way, aren't we? It's beautiful. We just came up through some cornfields, and we're entering into this nice part of the forest. And looking forward to the caves.
The afternoon was fading as we arrived at Simba Camp with Kilimanjaro as the backdrop. The porters and guides delivered our bags and made us feel right at home in our new surroundings. Dismas, our head chef, was busy in the kitchen. At the campsite, we claimed our tent, organized our stuff, and changed into warmer clothes for the cool evening. We gathered in the dining tent for a snack and then returned an hour later for dinner. Dinner always started with hot soup and bread. The main course was something heavy on carbohydrates, rice curry or pasta, with fresh vegetables and fruit. Each dinner was excellent, especially when we added hot sauce. Godlison joined us in the dining tent after dinner. He reminded us what we must do to see his office on the top of the mountain. Eat a lot, drink a lot, and poli-poli. That first night, we snuggled happily in our sleeping bags, knowing we had a good leader and a crew who were taking great care of us on the mountain.
On the second day, we hiked from Simba Camp to Kikalewa Caves, a distance of 6.2 miles in 7.5 hours. We started at 8,500 feet and hiked to 11,800 feet. gaining 3,300 feet.
Okay, it's first morning on the trail, and it's sun's up full this morning. It's going to be warm. Feel pretty good. Had a good night's sleep. It was a long night, but got a little bit cold. Prepared for tomorrow, but it's going to be warm today. The sun is out and the sky is really clear. We'll have a good day.
Our assistant guide, Manu, was also our maitre d'. He greeted us with a big smile and a hot bowl of porridge, toast, cheese, hot drinks, fresh pineapple, omelets, and sausage. Manu was fun-loving and high-spirited.
People from USA is number one.
We were lucky to have both Manu and Prosper as our assistant guides. Prosper always had a sweet, shy smile on his face. In his quiet, reserved way, he really enjoyed life. On that day, I became Bibi, Swahili for Grandma, and Bill became Babu, Swahili for Grandpa.
Bibi strong like a buffalo.
Our new names brought a lot of fun-loving attention. Under God Leeson's leadership, we always had fun. We hiked in heather and wildflowers most of the day. From the trail, we saw Kilimanjaro's two major mountain peaks, Kibo in the eastern ice fields on the crater rim, our ultimate goal, and Mwenzi with its dramatic peaks and jagged rocks. During the morning, our trail headed upward toward Kibo.
Poly, 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 poly.
We stopped for a break at First Cave. God Leeson tried to teach us Swahili but found it too great a challenge.
Now we are first cave in Kiswahili. Hii ni kevu. Can you say hii ni kevu?
We had lunch at Second Cave. After lunch, we followed the trail east in the direction of Mwenzi Peak. The Rongai route was pure magic because not many people go this way. We felt like we were on a wilderness climb with Kilimanjaro all to ourselves. You don't need mountaineering skills to climb Kilimanjaro, but a little coordination might help. It was always a thrill to see our yellow and blue tents in the distance tucked away in an isolated valley. Kim was the first to spot our campsite that afternoon.
Oh, we're almost there.
Who gets the slanted tent?
After the hike, I was filthy. A few handy wipes and a little deodorant substituted for a shower. Each campsite had an outhouse. Sometimes they even had a door. Sometimes we avoided the pits altogether.
Don't look at me. I'm gonna pee-pee.
After a snack, we took another hike to help us acclimate to the altitude. We saw a canyon covered with giant senecia. They looked like prehistoric plants and can grow to over 15 feet. In spite of his fun-loving nature, God Leeson put us on a serious training regimen. An important part of acclimation is hike high, sleep low. Something is working because no one is sick and no one is taking Diamox. After dinner and a game of hearts, we headed back to our tent under a canopy of glorious stars.
Day 3. Starting at Kikalewa Caves, we hiked to Mwenzi Tarn. We hiked a short 3.5 miles in 4 hours. Starting at 11,800 feet, we ended the day at 14,200 feet, an elevation gain of 2,400 feet.
The first 2 days of hiking were not too difficult. We'd gone about 10 miles from the Rongai trailhead and gained 5,500 feet, but always at a poly-poly pace. In spite of the clouds rolling in, our spirits remained high as we passed the 12,000-foot mark and made our way to Mwenzi Peak. After a few hours on the trail, the porters began passing us. They had to carry all of our food and much of the water, as well as our camping and hiking gear. Our group of 8 had 22 support people. We watched the porters carrying enormous loads and were amazed at their strength. Each trekker carried a day pack with 3 or more liters of water, lunch, and other personal items. By midday, we hiked above the plant zone. Only a few clumps of grass were tucked among the rocks. The scenery got more and more dramatic as we climbed closer to Mwenzi, the second highest peak on Kilimanjaro. More clouds gathered over Mwenzi, but the view across to Kibo was still clear. You could even make out Kibo Hut, our base camp on summit day. About noon, we spotted our campsite, 14,200 feet in the shadow of Mwenzi Peak, nestled inside an extinct volcano right next to the lake, or Tarn as it's called. Today, the porters only had to make a short trip to the Tarn to get our water. Supplying each of us with 4 liters of water a day was not an easy task. Sometimes they hiked for miles to gather water. Our job was easy: treat the water with iodine tablets and make sure we drank it. We arrived at the camp and did a little exploring.
What are you doing in there?
Sleeping.
We took an acclimation hike before dinner. We bounded up the jagged trail, setting a new altitude record, 15,000 feet. Godlesen was in fine form. We built a mini rock tower to mark our spot. Life was good among the troops until the big clouds rolled in. Weather changes quickly in the mountains and a storm was brewing. Mother Nature turned on us. We watched the snow and sleet blow at a 45-degree angle right outside our dining tent. Later that night, we snuggled in our tent that was covered with snow.
On our 4th day, we hiked from Mwenzi Tarn across the saddle to Kibo Hut. We hiked 6.4 miles in 4.5 hours. Beginning at just over 14,000 feet, we climbed to 15,700 feet, an elevation gain of 1,500 feet.
Sunshine, glorious sunshine with nothing but blue skies overhead. Our spirits lifted along with a snowstorm. Maybe, just maybe, we could make it to the top. We climbed up and over the ridge toward Kibo Hut. The trail dipped into the saddle, a vast lunar desert between 2 peaks, Mwenzi behind us and Kibo ahead. As always, the porters passed us on the trail. They dashed across the saddle to set up our campsite at Kibo Hut for our early arrival. That was one tough, hard-working group of guys. After 4 days on Kilimanjaro, our group had become a close family. Debbie D, now nicknamed Hawaii. Debbie Al, always clean and coiffed. Leo, charming and fun-loving. Steve, serious and concerned about all of us. Al, the nicest guy you could meet. Kim, fun, and terminally adorable. And when Godlesen said Twende, Swahili for let's go, we followed his orders.
Twende pole pole.
We stopped to rest a few times along the trail. The strain of the thin mountain air was beginning to take a toll. We all worried privately about the seriousness of our impending ascent. By mid-afternoon, we arrived at Kibo Hut, 15,700 feet. It was like Grand Central Station. I put on my lucky rabbit fur hat for the chilly afternoon, and then Babu and I posed for a photo next to the sign. Gelman's Point on the crater rim was only 5 hours away. I was tired and wanted to crawl back into my tent.
All excited. Time for lunch and a rest. And then one more hike before we head out at midnight.
At 3 o'clock, we took our acclimation hike to 16,000 feet on the same trail we'd use for tomorrow's summit. Then we headed down for an early dinner and my pre-birthday celebration. At 6 o'clock, we returned to our tents to rest before our midnight ascent.
Day 5. The climb to the summit from Kibo Hut is 2.5 miles and takes 6.5 hours. Beginning at 15,700 feet, we climb to 19,341 feet, the highest point in Africa. The elevation gain is 3,600 feet, or nearly 7/10 of a mile, straight up.
At midnight, we took our places in single file behind Godlesen and started up. The camp was eerie under the moonless sky. We climbed slowly in the darkness on a steep rocky trail illuminated by our headlamps. The only lights you could see were the stars above and the headlights of the dark figures making their ascent to the top of Kilimanjaro. I wasn't functioning well, I couldn't find my rhythm, and I was holding the rest of the group back. Godlison stayed with me while the rest of the group followed Prosper and Manu. We stopped several times so I could catch my breath and drink some water in the cold and dark night. As we passed 17,000 feet, I decided it was time to return to my tent. Godlison was disappointed, but we laughed as we slid down the steep trail. It was 2 o'clock in the morning on my 60th birthday, and I was standing on Mount Kilimanjaro with the sky loaded with stars. What could be better? As we finished our descent, I gave Godlison my lucky rabbit fur hat. Now here's Bill to describe his summit day.
I'd spent a lot of time thinking about and dreading this day. The nighttime hiking, the steep ascent, the cold, and the altitude. But now the conditions were excellent. No wind, temperatures in the mid-20s, cloudless sky. After Nancy left with Godlison, the remaining 7 trekkers lined up behind Prosper. I was second in line, with my eyes focused on Prosper's green and white striped gaiters. I wondered if I was ready for 5 or 6 hours of this. When I occasionally looked up, all I could see were stars and 2 groups of hikers' headlamps, which seemed to be directly above us. I was almost in a trance as we trudged up the scree slope. We passed the sign for Williams Point. This meant we had climbed about 1,000 feet and were about a third of the way to Gilman's Point. About a half hour later, we stopped for a water break at Hansmeyer Cave. The water in my water bladder had frozen, so I drank from my Nalgene bottle. The slope got steeper, and with each step, I slipped back a little. At about 4 a.m., we began to clamber over and around large rocks. I wondered how Prosper, our guide, could find the trail. It wasn't obvious to me at all. At 5 o'clock, I followed Prosper over a boulder, and there it was, the sign announcing Gilman's Point. We had reached the crater rim, over 18,000 feet. I was ecstatic and yelled down to the other hikers that we were at Gilman's Point. I looked east toward Mowensi Peak, but it was too early for the sunrise. I announced that I was definitely going on to the summit and asked who was going with me. Steve said he was going to head down. Leo and Debbie L. wanted to rest a little longer. Debbie D., Alan, Kim, and I headed for the peak. The trail along the rim was much easier, and as the sun began to rise, we had beautiful views of the crater and glaciers. In less than an hour and a half, we were at the summit. We took pictures of each other. I handed my video camera to Manu. I don't think Manu had ever used a video camera before.
The Kilimanjaro! Woo!
We headed back to Gilman's Point. We were all elated. We had conquered the highest mountain in Africa, the tallest freestanding mountain in the world. We rested at Gilman's Point and looked down on Kibo Hut, where we had begun hiking 8 hours before. The hike down was harder than I expected, and when I reached our camp, an hour and a half later, I was sweaty and exhausted. But I was happy to see Nancy as she came out of the tent to greet me. We left Kibo Hut at noon, descending to Hurambo Camp, where we arrived 5 hours later. The elevation at Hurambo is 12,000 feet.
After many hours of tough hiking since midnight, none of us was excited about another 6 miles to Hurambo, our last camp. The outhouse had flush toilets and there was a cold water spigot. The hardier souls washed their hair in that icy cold water. We had a lot to celebrate, our last night on the mountain and the final hours of my 60th birthday.
The last day, we hiked down to the Marangu Gate, covering 11.2 miles in 6 hours and losing 6,300 feet of elevation.
It was time for fun and pure silliness. Our last day on Kilimanjaro and only 11 miles to go. Godlison was particularly playful and the group joined in. We descended steadily down the trail toward the Marangu Gate and became crazier with each step. We stopped for lunch at Mandaro huts and then continued dancing down the path through the rainforest. The 6-hour hike was over before we knew it. We signed the register one last time at the park headquarters. Those who reached the summit, or Gelman's Point, received a certificate. Godlesen conducted an award ceremony, a perfect ending to a wonderful adventure. Although I didn't make it to the summit, the Kilimanjaro trek was a beautiful gift for a 60-year-old Bibi. Time to celebrate with Kilimanjaro beer. After a 2-hour bus ride to Arusha, we arrived at our hotel and said our goodbyes. Now, whenever I think of Kilimanjaro, I think of Godlesen wearing my lucky rabbit fur hat to his office in the sky.
Spielberg, we're doing what you say. Look, our campsite.
Okay, are you shooting?
Yeah.
Oh. Ah!
Babu, say Bibi! Okay, Godlesen, bring the troops across.
This was our guide, and we all made it.
The after effects.
Everybody say Bibi!
Bibi!